My name is Isabella, and I need you to understand something right from the start. I've never been the type of woman who backs down from a fight. Growing up in a working-class family in Detroit, my mother taught me that respect isn't given, it's earned. She cleaned offices at night to put me through college, her hands cracked and bleeding from the industrial cleaners, telling me, "Mija, you're going to have opportunities I never had. Don't you dare waste them." I didn't. By 28, I was a senior project manager at one of Chicago's most prestigious architectural firms. I had my own apartment in Lincoln Park, a wardrobe that cost more than my mother's yearly salary, and a confidence that could fill a room. That's when I met David. David Martinez was everything I thought I wanted in a man. 6'2", with those warm brown eyes that crinkled when he smiled, and a laugh that made you want to be the reason for it. He was a successful lawyer, specializing in corporate acquisitions, and when he walked into that fundraising gala in his perfectly tailored suit, every woman in the room noticed. But he only had eyes for me. "You know," he said, appearing at my elbow as I studied a particularly expensive piece of art, "that painting is worth more than most people's houses, but it's not nearly as beautiful as the woman standing in front of it." I turned to look at him, one eyebrow raised. "That's quite a line. Do you practice that in the mirror?" He laughed, and I felt something in my chest flutter. "Actually, yes, but only for the past 10 minutes since I saw you walk in. I'm David. Isabella. And I have to say, your technique needs work." Good thing I'm a quick learner. We talked for 3 hours that night, about architecture and law, about our families, about the way Chicago looked different depending on which direction you were walking. He told me about his dream of opening his own practice, about wanting to help small businesses navigate the complex world of contracts and acquisitions. I told him about my plans to eventually start my own firm, about the buildings I wanted to design that would change skylines. We were both ambitious. We both understood the hunger for something more. 6 months later, he proposed in the same gallery where we met, getting down on one knee in front of that overpriced painting. The ring was perfect, a vintage Art Deco setting with a princess-cut diamond that caught the light and threw rainbows across the wall. "Isabella," he said, his voice shaking slightly, "you make me want to be the kind of man who deserves you. Will you marry me?" I said yes before he finished the question. The wedding was everything I dreamed of as a little girl playing dress-up in my mother's closet. We held it at the Palmer House, with its gold-leaf ceilings and crystal chandeliers. My dress was a custom creation by a designer whose name I'd only whispered in fashion magazines, and when I walked down that aisle, I felt like I was walking toward my entire future. David's mother, Elena, sat in the front row with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. I should have paid more attention to that smile. Elena Martinez was what you might call old money, if by old money you meant a woman who'd married well and never let anyone forget it. She was elegant in that cold, untouchable way that some wealthy women perfect, all sharp cheekbones and sharper words, wrapped up in designer clothes that cost more than most people's cars. From the very beginning, she made it clear that I wasn't what she'd had in mind for her precious son. David could have married anyone, she told me during our first family dinner, her voice as smooth as poison honey. "The Williamson girl has such a lovely trust fund. And she went to Wellesley, you know. Where did you say you went to school again?" "Northwestern," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "On a full academic scholarship." "Oh, how resourceful of you." The word resourceful in Elena's mouth sounded like a diagnosis of some embarrassing disease. But David loved me, and that was supposed to be enough. For the first few years of our marriage, it was. We bought a beautiful house in Evanston, a 1920s colonial with original hardwood floors and a kitchen that got morning light. David's practice was thriving, and I'd been promoted to associate principal at my firm. We were happy, or at least I thought we were. The problem started small, the way they always do. David began working later, staying at the office until 9 or 10 at night. When I'd ask about it, he'd say something about a big case, about needing to prove himself to potential partners. His mother started calling more often, always seeming to catch him right when we were sitting down to dinner or settling in for a movie. "David, darling," her voice would drift through the phone. "I was just thinking about that lovely restaurant your father and I used to go to. Do you remember? You took that girl there once. What was her name? Sarah? The one with the beautiful family estate in Lake Forest?" David would laugh it off, tell her he was happy with me, but I could see something changing in his eyes. A distance that hadn't been there before. Then came the dinner parties. Elena loved to entertain, and somehow every gathering at her Gold Coast penthouse became an opportunity to showcase everything I wasn't. The other wives were all trust fund babies or society darlings, women who'd gone to the right schools and had the right pedigrees. They talked about charities I'd never heard of, about vacations to places I couldn't afford, about people whose names appeared in the society pages. I tried to fit in. God, how I tried. I bought the right clothes, learned the right wines, practiced talking about art and culture in the casual way that suggested intimate familiarity. But Elena had a talent for making me feel like an imposter at every turn. "Isabella, dear," she'd say, her voice carrying across the room, "didn't you mention your mother works in cleaning? How interesting. I was just telling Mrs. Pemberton about our summer house in Martha's Vineyard. It's been in the family for generations. I suppose not everyone has that luxury." The other women would nod politely, their smiles tight and uncomfortable, and I'd feel my cheeks burn with embarrassment and rage. But the worst part wasn't Elena's passive aggression. The worst part was watching David say nothing. He'd stand there, nursing his scotch, and let his mother tear me down piece by piece. When I'd bring it up later, he'd say I was being too sensitive, that his mother was just old-fashioned, that I needed to give her time to warm up to me. "She'll come around," he'd say, kissing my forehead in that patronizing way that made me want to scream. "You just have to understand, she's protective of family. She wants what's best for me." "And you don't think I'm what's best for you?" "Of course I do. That's not what I meant." But it was what he meant. Maybe not consciously, but somewhere deep down, David was starting to question whether he'd made the right choice. Whether the woman from Detroit with the cleaning lady mother was really worthy of the Martinez name. The doubt grew between us like a cancer, fed by Elena's constant undermining and David's refusal to stand up for our marriage. We started fighting more, about money, about time, about whose family we'd spend holidays with. The warmth that had drawn us together began to cool, replaced by a politeness that felt worse than outright hostility. By our 4th year of marriage, we were like strangers sharing a house. That's when Elena made her move. It started with small suggestions. Maybe David should consider a divorce lawyer, just to understand his options. Maybe I wasn't really committed to the marriage if I kept prioritizing my career over starting a family. Maybe David deserved someone who understood his world, his background, his needs. I found out about these conversations by accident, walking into David's home office while he was on the phone with her one evening in March. "I know, Mom," he was saying, his voice tired and strained. "I know you never liked her. But divorce it's complicated." "Is it, darling?" Elena's voice was crisp through the speaker. "You don't have children. You could make a clean break and start over with someone more suitable. Someone who wouldn't embarrass you at the charity ball." My heart stopped. The charity ball. The event where I'd accidentally used the wrong fork for the salad course and Elena had made sure everyone noticed. I married Isabella for a reason, David said, but his voice lacked conviction. Yes, and people make mistakes. The important thing is recognizing them and moving forward. You're still young, David. You could have your pick of any number of lovely girls from good families. I backed away from the door before I could hear his response, my hands shaking so badly I could barely make it to the kitchen. I stood there for a long time, gripping the marble countertop, trying to process what I'd just heard. My marriage was over. Maybe it had been over for months, and I'd just been too stubborn to see it. But if Elena Martinez thought she could push me around, if she thought I'd go quietly into whatever night she had planned for me, she was about to learn exactly how wrong she was. Because there was something Elena didn't know about me, something David had never bothered to discover in all our years together. I don't just earn respect. When pushed far enough, I take it. Chapter 2: The Art of War. The next few weeks were the strangest of my life. I went through the motions of being a wife, cooking dinner, asking about David's day, maintaining the facade of our marriage, while secretly preparing for war. Because that's what this was, whether David realized it or not. Elena had declared war on me the moment I'd slipped that ring on my finger, and I'd been too naive, too hopeful, too stupidly optimistic to recognize it. But I recognized it now. The first thing I did was contact my college roommate, Sarah Chen, who'd become one of Chicago's most ruthless divorce attorneys. We met for coffee at a little place in Wicker Park, far from anywhere David or Elena might accidentally spot us. "Isabella," Sarah said, studying my face across the small table, "you look like hell. What's really going on?" I told her everything. About Elena's constant undermining, about David's growing distance, about the conversation I'd overheard. Sarah listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes in her ever-present legal pad. "Okay," she said when I finished. "Here's the brutal truth. Illinois is a no-fault divorce state, which means the reasons don't matter as much as the assets. How are your finances structured?" "Joint accounts, mostly. The house is in both our names. My 401k is separate, obviously, and I have some investments from before we married." "Good. Keep detailed records of everything: income, expenses, assets. If David files first, you want to be ready." "But Isabella..." She leaned forward, her expression serious. "Are you sure this is what you want? Marriage counseling? Therapy? Trying to work things out?" I thought about David's face when his mother spoke about me, the way he'd stopped defending me, stopped seeing me as his partner and started seeing me as Elena's problem to solve. "This marriage died a long time ago," I said. "I just didn't know I was the only one still trying to save it." Sarah nodded. "Then we prepare for battle. But remember, the best victories are the ones your opponent never sees coming." She was right about that, though neither of us could have imagined just how true those words would prove to be. The second thing I did was start documenting everything. Elena's cruel comments at family gatherings, David's late nights and distant behavior, the way they both made me feel unwelcome in my own life. I kept a detailed journal, noting dates, times, witnesses to conversations. But more importantly, I started paying attention to the family finances in ways I never had before. See, one of the things about being married to a successful lawyer is that you assume they handle all the complex financial stuff. David managed our investments, our taxes, our insurance. I trusted him completely, the way wives are supposed to trust husbands. That trust, it turned out, was a mistake. Going through our files one evening while David was at another late client meeting, I discovered some interesting things. Like the fact that David had been moving money from our joint accounts into an investment portfolio I'd never seen before. Or the series of payments to a private investigator, payments that started around the time Elena began her campaign to end our marriage. My hands were shaking as I photographed the bank statements with my phone. David wasn't just planning to divorce me. He was planning to hide assets, to make sure I walked away with as little as possible. The betrayal cut deeper than Elena's insults ever could. This was the man who'd promised to love and honor me, who'd stood in front of 200 people and vowed to be my partner in everything. And he was actively working to destroy me. I called Sarah that night. "He's what?" she said, and I could hear her typing rapidly in the background. "Moving money, hiring investigators. Sarah, he's been planning this for months." "Okay, deep breath. This is actually good news." "Good news? How is my husband plotting against me good news?" "Because now we know what we're dealing with. And because hiding assets during a marriage creates a paper trail. A paper trail that can be very expensive for him in divorce court." I felt a cold smile cross my face. "What do you need me to do?" "Keep documenting. Keep photographing. And Isabella? Don't let him know you know. The element of surprise is our biggest advantage." So I became a spy in my own home. I learned David's patterns, his passwords, his routines. I discovered he'd been meeting with Elena every Tuesday for lunch at her country club, strategizing about their Isabella problem. I found emails between them discussing my embarrassing family background and my complete inability to fit into their social circle. But the most damaging evidence came from David's private investigator. Hidden in a folder marked Tax Documents 2019 was a report that made my blood run cold. The investigator hadn't just been looking into my background, he'd been looking for dirt. Photos of me having lunch with male colleagues, with detailed speculation about whether the relationships were professional or personal. Records of my spending habits, my friendships, my family's financial history. They were building a case to paint me as an unfaithful, gold-digging social climber who'd married David for his money and status. The irony was breathtaking. Elena, who'd married her husband purely for his wealth and social position, was planning to destroy me by claiming I'd done exactly what she'd done 30 years earlier. But there was one photo in that file that made me smile for the first time in weeks. It was a picture of me having dinner with my mentor, James Wilson, a 60-year-old gay man who'd been like a father to me since my promotion to associate principal. The investigator had noted our intimate conversation and obvious chemistry. If David and Elena thought this was damaging evidence, they understood even less about my life than I'd realized. I photographed everything and sent it to Sarah, then carefully put the files back exactly where I'd found them. That night, I lay in bed next to my husband, listening to him breathe, wondering how I'd been so blind. This man who I'd loved, who I'd built a life with, who I'd trusted with my heart and my future, he'd been working to destroy me for months. The old Isabella would have confronted him, would have demanded explanations, would have tried to fight for a marriage that was already over. But I was learning to be someone new, someone harder, someone who understood that sometimes love isn't enough, and sometimes the person who hurts you most is the one who knows exactly where to aim. I was learning to be strategic. The plan came to me slowly, over the course of several sleepless nights. David and Elena wanted to paint me as an outsider, someone who didn't belong in their world, someone who tricked their way into a life they didn't deserve. They wanted me to be the villain in their story. So I'd give them exactly what they wanted. Right up until I didn't. The opportunity came in late April, when Elena announced she was hosting a dinner party to celebrate our 5th wedding anniversary. "It's so important to celebrate milestones," she told David over the phone, her voice saccharine with fake affection. "Even if some marriages don't last as long as others." David accepted immediately, without consulting me. It'll be nice, he said that evening, not meeting my eyes. The whole family will be there. And the Pembertons, the Washingtons, the Harringtons, all of Elena's society friends. All the people who'd watched her tear me down for 5 years. Sounds lovely, I said, my voice perfectly calm. I'll make sure to wear something appropriate. David looked surprised by my easy agreement, but didn't question it. He should have. Because Elena Martinez was about to learn what happens when you underestimate a woman who's been pushed too far. And I was about to teach both of them that respect isn't something you can take away. It's something you can lose forever. Chapter 3. The Perfect Storm. The night of Elena's anniversary dinner, I spent 2 hours getting ready. I chose my outfit carefully, a black cocktail dress that Elena had once described as trying too hard, paired with the pearls David had given me for our second anniversary. I wanted to look exactly like what Elena thought I was, an outsider desperately attempting to fit into a world that would never accept her. The irony was delicious. David barely spoke during the drive to Elena's penthouse, his hands tight on the steering wheel, jaw clenched with whatever internal struggle he was having. I wondered if he knew tonight was supposed to be the beginning of the end for us. If Elena had told him about her plans for the evening. You seem nervous, I said, adjusting my lipstick in the passenger mirror. Just tired. Long day at the office. Of course. You've had so many of those lately. He shot me a sharp look, but didn't respond. Elena's penthouse was everything you'd expect from a woman who'd spent 40 years perfecting the art of expensive taste. 30 floors above Lakeshore Drive, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of Lake Michigan. The living room was decorated in that cold, minimalist style that screamed money. White furniture that no one was actually supposed to sit on. Abstract art that cost more than most people's houses. Fresh flowers that were replaced twice a week, whether they needed it or not. The other guests were already there when we arrived, scattered throughout the living room with crystal glasses of champagne and carefully practiced small talk. I recognized most of them from previous torture sessions, dinner parties. The Pembertons, who owned half of Chicago's downtown real estate. The Washingtons, whose pharmaceutical fortune had bought them a place in every social register that mattered. The Harringtons, whose daughter had apparently been David's girlfriend in college. Perfect. Isabella, darling. Elena glided toward us in a silver gown that probably cost more than my car, her smile sharp as a blade. Don't you look lovely, so creative with your style choices? Thank you, Elena. You look beautiful as always. She preened at the compliment, missing the fact that I'd learned to play her game. Always respond with grace. Always take the high road. Always let her reveal her own ugliness while maintaining perfect composure. David kissed his mother's cheek and was immediately swept away by Mr. Pemberton, who wanted to discuss some business deal. I was left standing alone in the center of the room, surrounded by people who'd never quite learned to hide their disdain for the outsider in their midst. Isabella, Mrs. Harrington approached with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. How are you, dear? I was just telling Elena about Sarah's engagement to that lovely Patterson boy. You remember Sarah, don't you? She and David were so close in college. Of course they were. How wonderful for her, I replied smoothly. I'm sure she'll be very happy. Oh, she will be. He's from such a good family. Money, breeding, all the right connections. It's so important to marry someone from your own world, don't you think? The conversation continued like that for an hour. Little digs disguised as polite conversation, each one designed to remind me that I didn't belong, that I'd never belong, that everyone in this room knew I was an imposter. I smiled and nodded and played my part perfectly. Because I was waiting. Dinner was served in Elena's formal dining room, around a table that could have seated 20, but was set for 12. The place cards had been carefully arranged. I was seated between Mr. Washington, who spent the entire soup course explaining why private schools were superior to public education, and Mrs. Pemberton, who felt compelled to share her thoughts on people who marry above their station. David sat at Elena's right hand, laughing at her stories, participating in conversations about people and places I'd never heard of. He looked completely at home, completely comfortable. He looked like he'd never been married to me at all. The main course was rack of lamb with some kind of fancy sauce that probably had a French name I couldn't pronounce. The wine was older than I was. The conversation flowed around topics I had no reference for: Martha's Vineyard property values, the latest charity auction prices, whose daughter was dating which senator's son. I ate quietly, responding when spoken to, watching David become more animated as the evening wore on. This was the world he'd come from, the world he'd never really left. I'd been fooling myself to think he'd ever truly chosen me over it. Isabella, Elena's voice cut through the dinner conversation like a knife through silk. You've been so quiet tonight. Are you feeling all right? The table fell silent, all eyes turning to me. I could feel the anticipation in the air, the sense that Elena was building toward something. I'm fine, Elena. Just enjoying listening to everyone. Oh, how diplomatic of you. But you know, I was just thinking. Elena paused to take a delicate sip of wine. We should make a toast. After all, it's not every day we celebrate 5 years of marriage. She stood, raising her glass, and everyone else followed suit. David looked confused but pleased, clearly thinking his mother was finally going to say something nice about our marriage. Poor David. He still didn't understand how his mother's mind worked. To David and Isabella, Elena began, her voice carrying easily through the room. 5 years of marriage is quite an accomplishment, especially when you consider how different their backgrounds are. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. David, of course, comes from a long line of distinguished families. His great-grandfather was a federal judge. His grandfather built the law firm that bears our name. His father served on the boards of 3 major corporations. The Martinez family has deep roots in Chicago society, roots that go back generations. She paused, her smile growing sharper. Isabella, on the other hand, brings such a unique perspective to our family. It's not everyone who can claim their mother cleaned the offices where their husband now works. It's so refreshing to have someone from such humble origins join our little circle. The silence was deafening. I could feel the other guests' embarrassment, their second-hand shame at Elena's cruelty. Mrs. Harrington was staring at her plate. Mr. Pemberton was studying his wineglass like it contained the secrets of the universe. David was frozen, his face pale, his mouth slightly open as if he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. And Elena was just getting started. Of course, we've all tried so hard to make Isabella feel welcome, haven't we? We've included her in our traditions, introduced her to our friends, attempted to help her understand our ways. But sometimes, she shrugged elegantly. Sometimes people just don't fit, no matter how much effort everyone makes. My hands were steady as I set down my wineglass. My voice was calm when I spoke. Elena, are you trying to say something specific? Her smile was triumphant. Well, since you ask, I suppose I am. David, darling, I know this is difficult, but we're all family here. We all care about you. And frankly, I think it's time someone said what we're all thinking. David found his voice. Mom, maybe we should. No, darling. You've been unhappy for months. Anyone can see it. You've lost weight. You're working constantly. You barely smile anymore. And I think we all know why. Elena turned to face me directly, her mask finally slipping completely. Isabella dear, I think it's time you accepted the truth. You've been a guest in this family for 5 years, and guests, no matter how long they stay, eventually need to go home. The words hung in the air like poison gas. I could hear Mrs. Pemberton's sharp intake of breath, could see David's face crumbling with shame and horror. Elena raised her glass higher. So here's to knowing when it's time to leave gracefully, before things become even more unpleasant. She drank her wine, her eyes never leaving mine. And that's when I smiled. You know what, Elena? You're absolutely right. I stood up slowly, reaching into my purse for the envelope I'd placed there 2 hours earlier. The envelope I'd been carrying for 3 weeks, waiting for exactly the right moment. I have been a guest in this family, a guest who's tried so hard to earn her place, to prove she belonged, to show she was worthy of the Martinez name. I walked around the table until I was standing directly behind Elena's chair. But the funny thing about being a guest, Elena, is that guests don't usually own the house they're visiting. I placed the envelope on the table in front of her, my hand perfectly steady. Maybe you should read this out loud, since you enjoy public announcements so much. Elena looked at the envelope suspiciously, then up at me. What is this? Open it. She did, her manicured fingers extracting the single sheet of paper inside. I watched her face as she read, watched her expression change from confusion to shock, to something that might have been fear. I don't understand. Read it out loud, Elena. Please, I insist. Her voice was shaky as she began to read. Property deed, 1247 Lakeshore Drive, Unit 3005. Chicago, Illinois. Her voice trailed off. Keep going. Property owner, Isabella Martinez, sole proprietor, as of... She looked up at me, her face white. This can't be right. Oh, but it is. You see, Elena, while you've been spending the last 5 years telling me I don't belong in this family, I've been working. Building my career, making smart investments, saving every penny I could. I gestured around the elegant room. This penthouse? The one you've been so proud of? The one where you've hosted countless dinner parties just like this one. I bought it 6 months ago when the previous owner defaulted on his mortgage. The silence was absolute now. David was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. The other guests looked like they were witnessing a car accident in slow motion. The rent you've been paying goes directly into my account. The lease you signed is with my investment company, Elena Martinez. You've been living in my house. Elena's wine glass slipped from her fingers, shattering against the marble floor in a spray of crystal and red wine that looked disturbingly like blood. But how did you? When did you? We never? You never asked. You were so busy assuming I was some gold-digging little nobody that you never bothered to learn anything real about me. Did you know I have 3 investment properties in Chicago? Did you know my architectural firm just landed the contract for the new federal building downtown? Did you know my portfolio is worth more than David's salary? I turned to address the entire table, my voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. See, the real irony here is that Elena spent 5 years trying to prove I married David for his money. But the truth is, I make more than he does. I always have. David's voice was barely a whisper. Isabella. Oh, and David? About that private investigator you hired? The one who's been following me around for months trying to dig up dirt for the divorce you've been planning? His face went gray. He's been reporting to me for the last 6 weeks. Turns out loyalty is a lot cheaper than you thought. Amazing what people will tell you when you pay them better than their original client. I walked back to my seat, my heels clicking against the marble floor in the perfect silence. Now, Elena, you said something about guests needing to know when it's time to leave gracefully? I picked up my purse and pulled out a second envelope. This is your 30-day notice to vacate. Don't worry, I'll give you a glowing reference for your next landlord. Elena was making small, choking sounds, her hands fluttering uselessly over the deed. But there's one more thing I want to say before I go. I looked around the table at all these people who'd spent years making me feel small, making me feel unwelcome, making me feel like I didn't deserve the life I'd built for myself. You want to know what the difference is between you and me? You were all born into your wealth, your status, your sense of belonging. You never had to earn any of it. You never had to prove you deserved it. You never had to fight for a single thing you have. I smiled, and for the first time in 5 years, it was completely genuine. I earned every dollar, every opportunity, every achievement. I built my success from nothing, with no help from family money or connections or trust funds. Everything I have, I earned through my own work, my own intelligence, my own determination. I picked up Elena's wine glass, the one that hadn't shattered, and raised it in a toast. So here's to knowing your worth, even when everyone around you tries to convince you that you don't have any. Here's to women who build their own empires instead of marrying into someone else's. And here's to never, ever letting anyone make you feel like a guest in your own life. I drank the wine, set the glass down, and walked toward the door. Oh, and Elena? The lease includes a clause about hosting events. You'll need written permission from the property owner for any future dinner parties. I paused at the threshold, looking back at the wreckage I'd left behind. I'll consider your request if you ask nicely. And then I walked out, leaving behind 5 years of trying to fit into a world that had never wanted me, walking toward a future that was entirely my own. The last thing I heard as the elevator doors closed was the sound of Elena Martinez finally crying. Chapter 4. The Architecture of Freedom. The first thing I did when I got home that night was pour myself a very large glass of wine and sit on my back porch, looking out at the garden David had never helped me plant. The April air was cool against my skin, and for the first time in months, I could breathe deeply without feeling like there was a weight pressing down on my chest. My phone had been buzzing constantly since I'd left Elena's, David calling over and over, probably trying to figure out how to fix the unfixable. I'd turned it off around the 20th call. Some things couldn't be solved with lawyer tactics and smooth talking. The next morning, Sarah called me at 7 a.m., her voice bright with what I can only describe as professional glee. Isabella, what the hell did you do last night? David's attorney called me at midnight, practically in tears, begging for an emergency meeting. I told her the whole story, from Elena's toast to the property deed to David's face when he realized his wife had been playing chess while he was playing checkers. You magnificent, brilliant woman, Sarah said when I finished. Do you realize what you've done? You haven't just won this divorce, you've made it impossible for them to paint you as anything other than a successful businesswoman who was systematically abused by her in-laws. Is that what I did? Isabella, you documented everything. You have evidence of financial manipulation, emotional abuse, attempted asset hiding, and a private investigator being used to harass you. Plus, you just proved in front of 12 witnesses that you're financially independent and professionally successful. Any judge in Cook County would side with you after this. I felt something loosen in my chest, a knot of fear I'd been carrying for months without realizing it. So what happens now? Now David's team tries to figure out how to minimize the damage. But honey, you hold all the cards. The house, the assets, the moral high ground, it's all yours. She was right. but it would take weeks for me to fully understand just how right she was. David came home around noon, looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. "We need to talk," he said, standing in the doorway to the kitchen where I was making coffee. "I think we've said everything we need to say. Isabella, please, just please." There was something broken in his voice that made me look at him, really look at him, for the first time in months. This man I'd loved, who I'd built a life with, who I trusted with everything I had. "Okay," I said, "talk." He sat down at our kitchen table, the same table where we'd eaten breakfast together every morning for 5 years, where we'd planned our future and dreamed our dreams and slowly, imperceptibly, let it all slip away. "I don't know how to fix this," he said finally. "You can't fix this, David. That's the point." I poured myself a cup of coffee, deliberately not offering him one. Some bridges, once burned, stay burned. "I never meant for it to go this far," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The investigator, the money transfers. I was just trying to protect myself. Mom said you were going to take everything, that you'd hired some shark lawyer to destroy me financially. So you decided to destroy me first." He flinched. I was scared. I know that's not an excuse, but I was scared and confused, and Mom kept saying, she kept saying, "What? That I wasn't good enough for you? That I was using you? That I didn't belong in your world?" I sat down across from him, studying his face. "Which part exactly was new information, David?" "None of it. But hearing it over and over, having it reinforced constantly." He looked up at me, and I could see tears in his eyes. I started to believe it. I started to think maybe she was right. Maybe I had made a mistake. "You did make a mistake. Just not the one your mother thinks you made." We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of 5 years pressing down between us. "The penthouse," he said finally. "How long have you owned it?" "Since November. I'd been tracking the property for 2 years, waiting for the right opportunity. When Harrison defaulted on his mortgage, I made an offer the same day." "And you never told me." "Why would I? You'd stopped talking to me about anything that mattered months before that. You were too busy planning my exit strategy with your mother." David rubbed his face with both hands. "God, Isabella, what have I done?" "You chose your mother over your wife. You chose the familiar over the unknown. You chose fear over love." I shrugged. "Honestly, David, you chose exactly what I expected you to choose." "What does that mean?" "It means I stopped believing in us a long time ago. Last night wasn't revenge, David. It was just clarity." The divorce proceedings took 3 months, which Sarah said was remarkably fast for a case involving significant assets. David didn't contest anything, not the house, not the investments, not even the alimony I could have claimed but didn't want. "He's too embarrassed to fight," Sarah explained during one of our meetings. "His mother's behavior at that dinner party is going to be gossip fodder in their social circle for years. The last thing he wants is a public trial where all of this gets aired in court." Elena, predictably, was less gracious about her defeat. She hired her own attorney and tried to challenge my ownership of the penthouse, claiming the sale had been fraudulent somehow. It took exactly 1 meeting with the bank, the title company, and my financial advisor to shut that down. But the real victory came 6 weeks after the dinner party, when Elena's attorney called Sarah to inform us that my former mother-in-law would be moving out of the penthouse a week early. "Apparently," Sarah said, trying not to laugh, "she found a lovely apartment in Wilmette. Much more suitable for someone of her reduced circumstances." It turned out Elena had been living well beyond her means for years, using the prestige of her address and her late husband's reputation to maintain a lifestyle she couldn't actually afford. The penthouse rent had been stretching her budget to the breaking point, and my sudden ownership had forced her to face some uncomfortable financial realities. David called me the day she moved out. "Mom wanted me to ask if you'd consider selling the penthouse back to her," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "At fair market value?" She was hoping for a family discount. I laughed, actually laughed out loud, for the first time since this whole mess started. "Tell your mother that if she'd like to submit a written offer, including a formal apology for 5 years of psychological abuse, I'll consider it. The apology needs to be handwritten, at least 2 pages long, and must acknowledge specific instances of her cruelty." "Isabella." "Those are my terms, David. Non-negotiable." The apology never came. I kept the penthouse, eventually converting it into a showcase for my architectural firm. The space where Elena had hosted her dinner parties became my conference room, where I met with clients and closed deals that would have made her society friends dizzy with envy. The irony was perfect. But the real transformation happened in my professional life. Word of what had happened at Elena's dinner party spread through Chicago's business community like wildfire. Not the petty gossip version Elena might have preferred, but the truth. The story of a woman who'd quietly built her own empire while being systematically undermined by her husband's family. Suddenly, I was getting calls from CEOs who wanted to work with someone who understood both ambition and resilience. Women in business reached out to share their own stories of fighting for respect in male-dominated industries. My client base tripled in 6 months. "You know what's funny?" I told Sarah over lunch one afternoon, about a year after the divorce was finalized. "Elena spent so much time trying to prove I was a gold digger that she never noticed I was actually a gold mine." "Speaking of which," Sarah said, sliding a folder across the table, "you might find this interesting." Inside was a newspaper clipping from the Chicago Tribune's business section. The headline read, "Martinez and Associates faces financial difficulties as senior partner departs." Apparently, David's law firm, the family firm that Elena was so proud of, had been struggling for months. David's distraction during our divorce proceedings had cost them several major clients, and his reputation in the legal community had taken a hit after word got out about the private investigator and the attempted asset hiding. "He's looking for a job," Sarah said. "Word is, he might have to take a position with a much smaller firm. Probably for half what he was making before." I felt a strange mix of emotions reading that article. Not satisfaction exactly, but a kind of cosmic justice. David had been so worried about me taking his money that he destroyed his own career instead. "Any regrets?" Sarah asked, watching my face. I thought about it honestly. Did I regret the marriage? The wasted years? The pain of discovering that the man I'd loved had been willing to betray me so completely? "No," I said finally. "I regret that it took me so long to see who they really were. But I don't regret anything I did once I figured it out." Because here's what Elena never understood, what David never grasped, what all those society people at that dinner party couldn't comprehend. Respect isn't something you inherit. It's not something you can buy or marry into or claim because of your family name. Respect is something you earn through your actions, your integrity, your willingness to stand up for what's right, even when it costs you everything. And sometimes, the most respectful thing you can do is refuse to let anyone treat you as less than you are. 6 months later, I got a call from an unexpected source. "Ms. Martinez? This is Jennifer Pemberton. I believe you know my parents." I remembered her, the Pemberton's daughter, a quiet woman in her 30s, who'd been at Elena's dinner party, but had barely spoken all evening. "I remember you, Jennifer. What can I do for you?" "I'm starting my own consulting firm," she said. her voice nervous but determined. "And I was wondering if you might have time for coffee. I'd love to hear about how you built your business, how you found the courage to stand up for yourself." We met the following week at a cafe in the Loop. Jennifer told me about years of watching her parents control every aspect of her life, about feeling trapped by expectations and obligations and the weight of family reputation. "That night at Mrs. Martinez's dinner party," she said, stirring her coffee nervously, "when you stood up to her, when you took control of the situation, I've never seen anything like it. I went home and couldn't sleep for a week, thinking about what you said, about earning your place instead of inheriting it. And now? Now I'm terrifying my parents by leaving the family investment firm to start my own company. They think I've lost my mind." She smiled for the first time since we'd sat down. "Maybe I have, but I'd rather be crazy and free than sane and suffocated." Jennifer became my first protégée, and through her, I met other women who were ready to stop accepting lives that were too small for them. We formed an informal network, successful women from all backgrounds who supported each other's ambitions and refused to let anyone define our worth for us. Elena would have hated knowing that her cruelty had inspired a movement. 2 years after the divorce, I ran into David at a Starbucks downtown. He looked older, tired, like the weight of his choices was finally catching up with him. He was wearing a suit that had seen better days, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there when we were married. "Isabella," he said, looking genuinely surprised to see me. You look wonderful." I did look wonderful. I cut my hair shorter, traded my careful corporate wardrobe for clothes that actually reflected my personality, and started wearing the kind of confident smile that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you're worth. "Thank you. How are you, David?" "I'm managing. New job, smaller firm, but the work is good. Honest work." He paused, studying my face. "I heard about your success, the new contracts, the awards. I'm happy for you." And strangely, I believed him. "Thank you. That means something, coming from you." We stood there for a moment, two people who'd once shared everything, now strangers making polite conversation. "Isabella," he said finally, "I know this is probably too little, too late, but I owe you an apology. Not just for the divorce, for the investigator, for all of that, but for never seeing you, for letting my mother convince me that you were somehow less than what you are. You deserve better than that. You deserve better than me." It was the apology I'd needed to hear 3 years earlier. Now, it felt like an epilogue to a story that was already finished. We both deserved better, David. We just deserved it with different people. He nodded, understanding. Are you happy?" I thought about my life as it was now. The thriving business, the penthouse that had become my sanctuary, the network of strong women I'd built around myself. The freedom to make my own choices, to define my own worth, to never again accept being treated as a guest in my own life. "Yes," I said, and meant it completely. "I'm happy." As I walked away from that coffee shop, I thought about the woman I'd been 5 years earlier. The woman who tried so hard to fit into Elena's world, who'd swallowed insults and accepted disrespect, and convinced herself that love was supposed to hurt sometimes. That woman was gone, replaced by someone stronger, someone who'd learned that the most important relationship you can have is the one with yourself. Elena had been right about one thing. I had been a guest in their world. But I'd never been a guest in my own life. And I never would be again. The last I heard, Elena was living in a modest apartment in Evanston, telling anyone who would listen about the ungrateful daughter-in-law who'd stolen her home through some kind of legal trickery. The story got smaller and more pathetic each time it was retold, until eventually, people stopped listening altogether. David remarried 2 years later, a quiet woman from a good family who fit perfectly into the diminished world he created for himself. I heard they were happy enough, in the way that people are happy when they've settled for less than they dreamed of. As for me, I built the life I'd always wanted, the life I'd been too afraid to reach for when I was busy trying to be someone else's idea of perfect. And sometimes, late at night in my penthouse office, I'd look out at the Chicago skyline and remember Elena's voice saying, "Guests eventually need to go home." She was right. I did go home. I just had to build it first.